Now, the Russian president has warned militarist rhetoric in the Middle East, and an attack on Iran could lead to a catastrophic war in the region. Dmitry Medvedev's statements came during the joint press conference with his German counterpart. Russia has been voicing strong words against an attack on Iran, following statements by Israel that a strike is more likely than diplomacy. The UN atomic watchdog is about to report on Iran's nuclear activities and provide evidence that Tehran has built a testing facility and computer models of warheads. Iran has dismissed all allegations, calling them fabricated. Let's talk more on this with foreign affairs analyst Richard Haydarian. Mr. Haydarian, so this leaked report that is expected to come out officially very soon, will it shed new light on Iran's nuclear program, as has been reported by the media so far?
Yeah, I think, first of all, we have to be clear that there's a lot of obfuscation and speculation with respect to the content and consequences of this new IAEA report. But what I can say is that, well, first of all, it depends what kind of media you're talking about. The more conservative and right-wing media is really playing up this IAEA report as sort of basis or foundation that Iran has been really moving towards weaponization of its nuclear program, therefore more sanctions and possibly confrontation of Iran. But if you look at statements by former IAEA officials like Harvard-based Mr. Heinonen, I think the report will not come up with any kind of definitive evidence or any kind of smoking gun that will prove consequential enough that Iran has really been engaged in any kind of weaponization program. I think we should look at the new IAEA report in light of efforts to impose new sanctions or further sanctions against Iran, and how this report could be politicized by Western powers or Israel to adopt a more confrontational approach towards Iran. I think that's a bigger picture that we have to look at beyond the IAEA report itself.
Yeah, just looking at another issue here. Just recently there have been reports on Syria that a secret nuclear plant was found in the country, and that's despite the fact that it was nothing more than a cotton-picking factory. So can everything in this IAEA report be trusted?
Yeah, I think, first of all, the problem with the IAEA report is that it relies heavily on satellite imagery and data provided by Western intelligence agency. I suppose some European countries, United States, or even Mossad was involved in providing the data. So the very veracity or provenance of the data itself is questionable. But more than that, the case of Syria, the Al-Hasaka spinning corporation or the textile factory proved that actually you cannot really rely on satellite imagery. There's a huge room for error in terms of using a satellite imagery as a basis for saying that the country is engaged in some sort of weaponization program. In the case of Iran, they're talking about a steel container which Iran has purportedly used for testing nuclear explosives, and that is based on satellite imagery provided to IAEA by Western intelligence agency. And if you look at the Syrian case, it clearly says that these kinds of evidences are too shaky or flimsy as a basis for coming up with the conclusive evidence that Iran has been engaged in weaponization of its nuclear program.
Okay, let's talk about now reactions from both sides. Israel is actually believed to have its own nuclear capability. Is there a case to argue that Iran might be feeling threatened and therefore has to defend itself?
Well, definitely Israel has around 150 or 200 nuclear warheads. But I think the difference, the kind of problems between Iran and Israel is more ideational on the level of principles. I think Iran has been very much opposed to Israel's aggressive policies in the occupied territories. But I don't think that Israel's conventional or nuclear capability is a basis for Iran to justify weaponizing its nuclear program. I don't see it in that particular light. But I definitely, in terms of ideology, in terms of principles, there are differences between the two countries.
Okay,
but I don't see Iran making that decision. Yeah.
Right. Sorry. Let's just look at a bit more of the rhetoric. I mean, if Iran was actually developing some sort of nuclear capability, won't it actually be dangerous to be provoking them in such a way by saying that Israel will actually attack them?
Do you mean that whether Israel attacking Iran is something dangerous?
If Iran is actually developing a nuclear capability, won't it be dangerous to be treading along this path of actually bombing those facilities, if indeed they are developing nuclear capabilities?
Well, I think there's definitely a risk in terms of a risk embedded in Iran's foreign policy, which is very critical of the United States and Israel. And I think Iran has taken that risk into consideration. But I think definitely Iran knows that Israel is in no position to really strike its nuclear facilities, because its nuclear facilities are numerous. They're spread across the country. Some of them are highly protected, and even bunker busters that the United States has given to Israel might not take out a lot of them. So I think Iran has learned from the experience of Iraq, the Iraq experience in 1981, and has a very sophisticated way of protecting its nuclear facilities. And I think it also knows that the United States of America does not have any interest in creating a new war front in the region by confronting Islamic Republic of Iran, because you can see that the United States also wants to withdraw from Iraq and Afghanistan as soon as it can. So I think Iran is very aware of those constraints on Israel and United States of America to really push for some sort of confrontational approach. But at the heart of this issue for Iran, I think Iran sees the nuclear issue as something that is about its national interest. Iran feels that it has an inherent right to develop a nuclear program for economic purposes, for energy security, and definitely as a member of the NPT, it really has that sovereign legal right and justification to develop its nuclear program. So it's willing to stand and take the risks. And so far it has been punished by sanctions, but I don't see that those sanctions are really crippling the Iranian regime.
All right. Thank you very much for your analysis there. Richard Haydarian, a foreign affairs analyst. Thank you.